onto this story. Now, South Africa's leaders need to focus on the development of the country's cities, which have deeply and profoundly been shaped by special logic of apartheid. In a new report, the Center for Development and Enterprise says South Africa's future lies in its cities and has produced a 20-page report based on the CDE work on cities over many years and 5 specifically commissioned papers from leading local and international economists on the economics of cities in South Africa. And Bernstein is the director of the Center for Development and Enterprise, and she joins us now. And thank you very much for your time. This is quite a detailed report from the CDE on what is not working and the potential that appropriate policy direction could mean for South Africa's cities. Of course, we know the infrastructure decay in most of our cities, but what led you to actually develop such a report at this stage?
Well, cities has been an area we've done a lot of work in the past, and we think the future of our cities is absolutely critical for growth and for dealing with many of the crises South Africa faces. So cities all over the developing world and the rich world are places that can be enormous job creating and machines, really, for economic opportunity and social and other kinds of opportunities. And South Africa's cities can be doing so much better. But in order to do that, we need to rethink how they're being governed and how we're managing them. So we're trying to think through this, among other important issues, to feed into the election campaign next year and hopefully influence the new government in 2024.
And the report is quite damning on this current state of decision-making, the leadership capacity that we have, and the fact that we are not even using land appropriately. Land use planning actually takes advantage of potential power of the forces that are there. And you have a chapter there that speaks about how we are misusing the policy when it comes to the land allocation. Talk to us about that.
Let's talk about the shape of our cities. Because of apartheid and segregation, we have very sprawling cities, and post-apartheid policies have strengthened that in many respects. So poorer people are pushed away from the heart of the city where economic opportunity is concentrated. That causes two things. The one, transport policy is really important because poorer people have to pay an enormous amount of money on getting to and from work or even to a job interview. And we're saying that transport for commuters is not working well in our cities, and we have to devolve many powers to metro and large city governments that have capacity. Take PRASA, for example. It's failing, and it's time to look at how we can give big cities the powers to deal with urban metro rail. So that's one issue. But the second issue is our housing policy, where we think it should be much more influenced by where people themselves want to live. And we need to create as many opportunities for poorer people to live closer to economic opportunity and not far, far away. And we've got to rethink things. So, for example, we developed the slogan, far better to rent in Orange Grove, close to economic opportunity, buses, and all sorts of other things. Far better to rent there than to own far away in Orange Farm. But that's just one illustration. So we've got to get our cities much more dense, which will help poorer people to get access to opportunity. It's much better for informal enterprises and firms because there's a lot more foot traffic. And that requires rethinking how we allocate the housing budget. We need to support big city governments in managing greater density. You've got to enforce basic rules of health and safety. And you have to also allow this kind of development to take place. Now, another area that's critically important as more and more people come closer to the hearts of our cities is policing. The National Policing Department is failing dismally. You can see this in the most easy indicator of this failure, which is the murder rate, which has gone up throughout the country by about 60% in the last decade. Now, we should be devolving policing powers to big cities that have capacity.
And something interesting is that this report places the blame mostly on politicians and policymakers in cities, and it doesn't say much about the role of the private sector. In fact, the report actually says that most cities do not understand how business functions, and therefore businesses are not actually operating optimally. What should be the role of the private sector, and what do you mean when you say that most cities do not understand how business actually functions?
Well, let me make 2 points. Business needs an environment with safety for their workers, security of their investment, good transport for their workers, safe environments so workers could work at night, or you could have night markets. All sorts of things need to happen in a city for more and more investment to take place. And in our experience and a lot of the research, we know that a lot of city governments in South Africa today do not understand the requirements of business and firms and their workers. And so we are suggesting that there is greater interaction with business through organized business. I'm not talking about crony capitalism or jobs for pals or contracts for people, favored people. I'm talking about in general, in the public interest, the city government and business need to be agreeing on the vision of the city, where infrastructure is needed and how it's going to be financed, because there's a lot of capital in the private sector that could help with all of our infrastructure backlogs. But all of this, Polani, I need to make one very important point. The kinds of people attracted to city government and operating in city government at the moment is not very encouraging. And we need to look at how we attract senior leaders to want to run our big cities. We need to fix the rules about coalitions, which the national government needs to get involved in quickly so that they can be more stable and much more accountable for delivering services rather than just fighting over position. And we need to deal with cadre deployment in the cities and big metros where it's happening and make sure we have people fit for purpose in big jobs. Running big cities is complex and it needs to be done well. So there are a lot of issues that need to be fixed in our cities, and we're saying a key starting point is how we manage, how we govern our big cities, which is new for South Africa, and we need to do it much better. And it's not working well in most of our big cities, and it's vitally important because we've got to devolve powers and capacity to these cities to create a much better environment for poorer people, to maximize opportunity for them, but also for the firms that can start businesses and can employ people. And it's not just big firms, it's big, medium, small firms, informal firms. We need all of them and more of them, but that requires managing our cities in the public interest much more effectively.
Certainly a lot to ponder for policymakers around the country. And Bernstein is the director at the Center for Development and Enterprise. Thank you very much for your time.